going to mute all for background noise. Please unmute yourselves if you'd like to share, ask, speak, whatever. Okay, so we are up to page 22, which I had sent out, and we're at the bottom of the page. Good morning, Yugoji. You're muted.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. So we're at the bottom of the page, and we had, again, we've opened begun the third book of the Torah, which it runs. It's an outgrowth, I guess you could say, of the second book of the Torah. The end of the second book of the Torah has the construction of the tabernacle, and then there's the central function of the tabernacle, which is offerings, and we've been going through some of them, and they're basically the four different general types of offerings, and one of them is for accidental violations. So obviously, if I've done something accidentally to you, I have to apologize to you, and so I'll make it up to you. We're talking about now on the God end. So even though it's not deliberate, the idea that I wasn't careful about something enough, so that something, a negative consequence arose from my actions, well, there's an offering to bring to God. And we spoke about, originally it started off with leadership, the high priest, the high court, the king, where they have to do this. It's in a public way, really, where people are going to know that they've done something inadvertently, but something wrong, and that's actually, it's considered, and it's placed first, and then we're gonna now get to go like what happens when any of us do something wrong inadvertently. And one of the reasons it starts off, as we've mentioned, with specifically with those in leadership authority positions, what we would call today perhaps positions of power, is because for them it's really important to be able to acknowledge their own weakness and their own mistakes to themselves, to God. And actually I'm going to shut something here so we don't have more noise. And to them and to God and to the community, that they don't have this image that they're projecting or people see as that they're above the normal human foibles and frailties. So now we get to the offerings of individuals. We'll look at the sixth reading, 27 at the bottom. It says, now that we've discussed the special offerings of the special sin offerings of the nation's leader, we will turn to the sin offering brought by an ordinary individual. If some other person, who is one of the common people of the land, unintentionally commits a sin punishable by execution if committed intentionally by his or her transgressing any of the passive commandments of God, thereby incurring guilt, then, and we're going to go into the process that needs to be followed in that offering. So there is one of the Hasidic insights here. Actually, so let's turn the page because it's going to 28. Page 23, verse 28, if his sin that he committed is made known to him, he must bring either a goat or a sheep as a sin offering. If he chooses to bring a goat, then he must bring a sacrifice, an unblemished female goat for a sin that he committed to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay, so that was verse 28. Now let's go back to page 22. And we do have a Hasidic insight on 27, 28, the female goat. Before we get to that, just a comment here in the verse. There's a language that uses a little bit odd, which they translate correctly. If some other person who's one of the common people of the land, the Hebrew word used here is Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz is still a very conventional phrase for someone who is not well schooled in details of our tradition and our laws. So, and they translate it as common people. And one of the things that our rabbis have noted is that when we're talking about someone who is not steeped in an awareness and a consciousness of how to act properly according to Torah law, which takes a lot of consciousness and takes a lot of expertise and it takes a lot of awareness. But rather, they're not. It's not that they're doing something wrong, but they're spending time making a living, caring for loved ones. Life can be very hectic, and it's not easy, and it's even within Jewish law. It's not. People are not bidden to spend their entire day studying. They have to make a living, and there's therefore an understanding that we just can't spend our whole day on this. But this is when we talk about someone like that who's not steeped in it. Again, not only not aware of all the details, but they're not living it. They're not in the front of their minds. When a person like that does something wrong inadvertently, then there is this. There's an offering to be brought in, and that should call for introspection. Some rabbis point to say, but that's really for someone where it's not in the forefront of their minds. But for someone who is spending their day in a much more Judaically supportive environment, it's saying there. Obviously, they would bring the same thing in the legality of it. They would bring the same offering. You say, but this is really not meant for them. For them, it's much more serious, because if when we make mistakes, it's often because we weren't thinking, we weren't conscious, and we weren't conscious about it because we were thinking about something else. And we have different things that take up our brain space. But here, for someone who is living a life of more of where it would lend itself to consciousness, and yet they made a mistake, so they were not properly focused to the extent that they would foresee where a mistake could happen and close that gap. So there, again, this is kind of a homiletic turn, that a person would not just say, okay, now I just have to bring an offering. They really have to ask themselves, about their scale of priorities. And we've mentioned this in different contexts, not in this specific one, the idea of when we make a mistake, there is an accident. Accidents happen, but we should ask ourselves, is there something I could learn from this, that I allowed this accident to happen? Okay. So now to go to Hasidic insights. It says, as a female goat, specifically female. So it says here there are two basic explanations of how sacrifices atone. Because, before we get into this, just to understand, there's this is all for an inadvertent sin, and that's a female goat is brought. There's another one which we haven't gotten into yet. What happens if someone did a deliberate sin? They knew exactly what they were doing, but they knew it was wrong. They were overwhelmed by some temptation, and they did it. Well, there's an offering to be brought for that too. That's not what we're talking about here. But that one's a male animal. So why the distinction between female and male? That's what this is going to focus on. It says there are two basic explanations of how sacrifices atone. Number one is one that I don't think I've really brought because it's a little harsh. It's from a great Rabbi Nachmanides in the 13th century, and it is certainly a well-respected opinion. It says we should imagine that everything being done to the animals being done to us. The sacrifice that jolts us out of our negative ways. Through the offering, there's an animal is killed, and it's at least part of it is burned on the altar. What Nachmanides says is we're there, at least in these cases of inadvertent or deliberate misbehavior. So we'd say we have to look at it and say, this is, that vicariously, that's me. To jolt us, not that we're going to die, but to jolt us out of our reverence, say, this is really important stuff. And I can't believe that I allowed something, negative, non-Torah, something God doesn't want to pass through my being, through my actions, even if they were inadvertent or inadvertent. The animal, there, so that's one level of the idea of what an offering is. The second one is the one that I discussed anytime we mention it, is the animal personifies our animal instincts. The offering, the Hebrew word for offering, as I've mentioned many times, is korban. Korban means it's a way of coming close. The Hebrew word korban is just in the language of it, the etymology of it. An Israeli would tell you that the root of it is karov, which means to come, to be close, or to come close, or to be a relative. I mean, it's all closeness ideas. And what we do, and how do we come close? We want to, especially in a case where we've done something which kind of distances us. If I did something this morning, even if it was inadvertent, God forbid I did it, but now I did something that, sometimes we do things that are, think about it in the human form. Sometimes we do things that are offensive to the person we care about. Do it accidentally, but the action is not something that brings close. It distances, and then you get past it, and we say, well, I made a mistake, whatever it was. But here, between us and God, the Torah explicitly uses the language that our behaviors, our non-Torah behaviors, in other words, well, contrary, are contrary to Torah behaviors. They put a wedge between us and God. Obviously, God always loves us, like a parent always loves a child, and that's an undying love. But sometimes there can be a wedge between a parent and a child too. It happens. It's not fundamental, but it's real. So here, the animal personifies our animal instincts. When we're looking at the animal, our selfish, our impulses, our natural impulses are referred to as our animal soul, our animal dimension of being. So now we're offering an animal on the altar. That in that animal we see our weaker self, our more impulsive self, our instinctive self, our self-directed, self-indulgent internal dimension. And that is what led to the misdeed, in contrast to our divine soul, which did not participate in the misdeed. In our higher consciousness, and again, you can think about it in relationships, in our deepest self, if there's someone who indeed matters to us, we don't want to do anything to hurt them. We don't want to do anything to distance ourselves from them. The fact that it does happen is either because it was accidental or because I wasn't totally in touch with what really matters to me, because I wanted something else. I wanted something done. It was a time of temper or whatever it was. So we acted against our own best interests, but they are ones that we recognize. When everything, all things being equal, everything is being quiet, we know that what we really want is a deep relationship with this person. And sometimes we act against our own interests because we're tapping into a shallower side of ourselves and not fully conscious and being governed by what our deepest desire would be. So that's in contrast to our divine soul, which does not participate in the misdeed, because that part of ourselves it's being silenced, it's being shunted to the back, but it's not, that part of us is not kicking in when we're doing something that's going to hurt a loved one. The same thing with God. Our higher visionary self is never part of doing something consciously to disconnect from God or drive a wedge, or it's not even part of being distracted. It's being pushed to the side, and that's by the animal soul. So when we bring an offering, that symbolizes the animal soul, and the offering stirs our divine soul, inspiring us to serve God better than we did previously. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put ourselves into context. We're being the animal. The animal represents this part of our persona that gets in the way and presents us this challenge, and we bring it and we offer it to God. So we want it to be consumed by this heavenly fire of love for God, and we're trying to redirect ourselves and reorient ourselves and aligning ourselves with who God wants us to be. So there are two tracks of how we can read offerings. One, that's me, that should be me there in the offering. It's a bit harsh. And one is that, no, that's my weaker self, and I'm trying to get past it. That weaker self, I'm trying to get my arms around it so that I can have a discipline by my higher self. The first explanation is harsher than the second, is therefore appropriate for more severe sins. There is this idea, say, okay, sometimes we need a slap in the face. I mean it figuratively. We sometimes when a person needs to hear harsher words to be able to make sure to get their attention, to be direct. And sometimes you want to say it in a gentler, quieter way, which is certainly the way I like to speak. But sometimes I can see that it's not effective because somebody need to hear blunt words. So, and this is something that we have these two ideas of how to approach. There is, and we said here, the guilt offering, which can atone for deliberate sins, is brought from male animals, suggesting the male meditation necessary to shake a person free from deliberate misbehavior. We're talking about inadvertent sins. Inadvertent sins, you want to be softer with someone. If someone is sitting in my office and telling me they deliberately did something which violates God's code or violates their family or something, for me to say, I get it, I understand that's really not what the person needs. The person says, do you realize what you did? Do you realize how hurt that other person is? And especially if you get into the God thing. Sometimes you have to be more direct. In the Torah itself, and I was going to bring it up as to just put it on the screen as a split screen, but I forgot to prepare it. When the Torah tells in the book of Exodus, when God tells Moses to prepare for the Sinai experience, right before the Jews, as the Jews are at Mount Sinai, and as God is about to appear on Sinai and speak to him, or is already on Mount Sinai, but speak to him, tell him what the 10 those 10 original commandments to tell the Jews. The language of the Torah is, this is what you should say to the house of Jacob, Beis Yaakov, and this is what you should tell to the sons of Israel. And Rashi, the primary commentary on the Torah, Rashi says right there, and he's taking it from the Talmud, that he says, Beis Yaakov, the house of Jacob, refers to the women, females. As a matter of fact, the largest network of girls' yeshivas around the world for the past 100 and something years is called Beis Yaakov because of that. So why the house of Jacob? But there it says, this is how you should say, what you should say to the house of Jacob, and we should tell the sons of Israel. And the language of say and tell, which really are synonymous in the English, but in the Hebrew, they're actually two different words. One denotes more, first of all, he said, speak to the women first, and then the men. But then there's another thing, is that to the women, there's a softer language, and to the men, there's a harsher language. And what does that mean? And it doesn't mean necessarily men and women only. It means that those with the feminine rhythm and those in the masculine rhythm. The feminine rhythm is seen as one which is a more instinctively much more attuned to consequences and to what's going on, and being able to juggle and being able to foresee events and therefore in such a case especially, also someone being able to figure out where mistakes might happen. The male is seen as a little bit, and as a male, I got to go easy here a little bit, and certainly the Torah is not knocking males, but a little bit more obtuse sometimes, emotionally or spiritually, and needs a more direct, and sometimes a harsher. Harsh is a harsh word. I can't think of a better word, but not beating around the bush and not insinuating anything, and not trying to be diplomatic, just saying it as it is, because sometimes that's the only way a guy's going to hear it. So the language here, you say, is that, and the language here is that the male offering was for a deliberate sin, because the message had to come across. The idea was that the message should come across more blunt in a male way, and the female was for the inadvertent, because you could afford a softer approach. And in general, there's an idea. We always want to try to be soft. The Torah, we use a language. Every time we take out the Torah, we say that means that its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are of peace. You want Torah, ideally, you want to be able to convey it and discuss it and share it in a way of pleasantness and politeness, and you don't want to hit people between the eyes with things. At the same time, the Talmud says that people should, get their better side angry at their weaker side. And angry is a harsh word, and there's the word there is anger. The idea is that if I am seeing that I have this weakness for whatever it may be, and it gets me into trouble, I should look at myself and say, what's wrong with you? You can do this. Stop indulging or surrendering to this impulse, or to this specific drive. Now, it's not talking about being angry with ourselves. Being angry with ourselves is not healthy, and it's certainly self-directed anger does not lead to good consequences. But the idea of, in a controlled way, saying, I don't have patience for this. I'm not going to be understanding of this weakness. Understanding of another person, there I have to be more understanding always, because I don't know exactly what they're going through, but I know what I'm going through, and therefore to be a little, that Talmudic advice, it comes across harsh. That our better side, we should make sure that our better side gets angry at our weaker side if we keep on falling into the same trap. So it does sound harsh, but the idea is that sometimes that's necessary to be able to make the point, adequately make the point. The second, gentler, more female meditation is more appropriate for unintentional sins. Therefore, the sin offering will go to 23, which atones for such sins, is brought from female animals. When we feel estranged from God and seek to draw closer to Him, we need to evaluate the cause of our estrangement. We can then meditate on our relationship with God in the way appropriate to our situation and take the appropriate corrective action. So, what the two different offerings are telling us is that we need, these were not, it was just about a function of bringing an animal. This was the idea of really getting focused ourselves and to recognize what is it that we need. What we know on the user end, we did something wrong. And if we did something wrong, there's something undesirable flowed from our actions. Well, that is something we have to ask ourselves about. Is it something that I have to look at myself and say, I can treat it, or the person who's coming to me for help, treat it in a softer way, which would, in the general sense, be in an inadvertent violation? Or not because I want to be harsh, not because I'm personally angry. I should never talk to someone about my personal anger. But the idea of being blunter and firmer is something that it's sometimes, and I know this from my life, my work. Sometimes you really need to jolt someone out of their personal reverie or little cloud that they're living in, and it's going to take some shocking language sometimes just so they realize that they've done something shocking. And that's what the point here is. Okay, now on 23, we already read verse 28. I would just note here that there's a point here which opens up a topic that I want to be careful about, and but I think it bears mentioning. It says, if a sin that he committed is made known to him. What do you mean made known to him? Sounds like he's passive. He's just he's on the sidelines, and someone has made known, or some force has made it known to him. It's not that if a sin that if he found out about a sin that he committed, but it's made known to him. Who made it known? So one of the, or actually a few of the early commentaries who try to find some of the spiritual and moral guidances for ourselves in these verses, they point out that the Talmud says that, and I will be very careful with this. We speak to God every day, 3 times a day, and we ask God to have for a life that is manageable and stress-free and pain-free and healthy and successful, and that's what we should be doing. We should be asking God for that, and we should be trying to align ourselves with a life that the Torah says is one which positions us for God's blessing in our lives. What happens if something goes wrong? I got a phone call now, God forbid, or whatever it is, where something is misfiring in my life. So of course, the first thing is I have to deal with it, and I have to also I want to immediately think of what I could do to allow for myself to be make myself a better conduit for God's blessing in my life. Because if something misfired, well, God may be blessing me, but it's not showing itself in my life. So one of the things, the thought process is, and we find this in the Talmud very clearly, is that when we're faced with a problem, a stressful situation, a painful situation, we should look to see where we could better align ourselves with God. And certainly the inference is where we are lacking in that regard. So anytime we have something that is misfiring, our mind should go to say, not to say, "Oh, God's punishing me for this." That's I don't like that, and I don't think that's a helpful way of thinking. But to say, what's lacking in my life that's not allowing for the blessing to come through? So what can I do to make myself more of a conduit for God's blessing? So in that sense, God speaks to us through our lives to let us know we have work to do. And then when we say, that's what we say, is made known to him, the conscious person. And certainly in this case, the conscious Jew is going to, because of what's going on in their lives, they may say, okay, what did I do? Where am I off? And then recognize, oh, I did that accidentally. But that was off. It's made known to him or to her by God, by life. The things in life, God is speaking to us through life's events. And we speak back to God in how we respond to the events. So now we'll go to verse 29, and we'll just read this and the rest of it. Come quickly. It says he must, number 29, he must lean his hand forcefully on the sin offering's head. We said that's the word smicha. It's like, here it's on an animal, but smicha means laying of hands. That's rabbinic ordination goes by that name. And slaughter with the animal with the intention that it be a sin offering in the place where the scent offering is slaughtered, meaning on the north side of the altar within the precincts of the courtyard of the tabernacle. The priest must ascend the ramp of the altar, take some of the animal's blood with his finger, and place it on the 4 protrusions of the altar used for scent offerings. If, however, you apply the blood to only one of the protrusions, the sacrifice is still valid after the fact. He must then descend the ramp and pour all of its remaining blood onto the south side of the base of the altar. The blood was, as we've mentioned, I believe, an essential part of all this. The blood represents passion, and where we're directing our passions is a big part of how we're able to position ourselves to become closer to God. He must remove all of its fat, just as the fat would be removed from the peace offering of goats. The priest must then burn it up on the altar with the intention that it be pleasing to God. Thus, the priest makes atonement for the individual, so that he may be then be forgiven. If he brings a sheep for a sin offering, he must bring in an unblemished female. He must lean his hand forcefully upon the sin offering's head and slaughter it with the intention that it be a sin offering. The place where he slaughters the scent offering, meaning on the north side of the altar, within the precincts of the courtyard of the tabernacle. The number 34, the priest must ascend the ramp of the altar, take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and place it on the 4 protrusions of the altar used for the sin offerings. For scent offerings, I'm sorry. If, however, he applied the blood to only one of the protrusions, the sacrifice is still valid after the fact. He must then descend the ramp and pour all of its remaining blood onto the south side of the base of the altar. He must remove all its fat, just as the sheep's fat is removed from the peace offering, similar to the goat, but also including the tail. The priest must then burn them up on the altar upon the fires that are there, on which to burn up the sacrifices offered to God. Thus, the priest makes atonement for the individual for a sin that he committed, so that he may then be forgiven. This is all about achieving forgiveness. Now, went through that quickly. This will go through more slowly. Page 24. We have what's called the variable sin offering. Variable in the sense that there were the type of offering was commensurate to a person's means or understanding. So the way this starts, just before we get into it, the Torah sees more than I think than our current our society, our American society, sees tremendous objective power in our words. If I tell you I'm going to buy something, that really will have no weight. Something from you, it'll really have no weight legally, as far as I know, unless there were witnesses there. And certainly, it's really, I would have to have something signed and to the extent some kind of an order or a contract. Words themselves are, and understandably so, in the courts we want something in writing, and we want it to validate it, and we want it to notarize, and all of that. That's true in a court for human understanding, and the only way I can know, if I'm sitting out as a judge in a court, to know what you committed to what one person committed to another is if I see the writing, if I see documentation. Just hearing what one person saying to another, what they said, it's not substantive enough, and therefore it's very hard to compel one party to do something because of something that doesn't have any documentation. But then there's the question is where we are in the eyes of God. In the eyes of God, a verbal commitment is a commitment, no less binding than a written commitment. It's the commitment part. So our words are powerful. For that reason, oaths were very, very, and oaths meaning sometimes using God's name, oaths were very, very rarely taken. It's not, oaths are binding, and sometimes there were vows to donate to the temple, but they were very serious. And therefore, in the common Jewish practice for thousands of years, people tried to avoid oaths as much as possible. They would commit, but say, but without an oath, because they couldn't see the future. They couldn't know all the variables. So if they said, I'm going to donate this to a synagogue or to whatever, some public welfare, I'm going to give $1,000, let's say, without a vow, and then try to give it as quickly as possible. But once there's a vow, there's a lot of gravity to it. And what a vow? I mean, it's saying your word, especially if you say I vow. Torah says we have to do everything whatever our mouths have uttered. Now, there is because of that, and it will come up here, there's sometimes in Torah law where there would be if one of you said, I owe you $100, and I said, no, actually I owe you 50. In a case like that, so I had a partial admission. In a case like that, it's actually a biblical directive that the Jewish court, you take me to a Jewish court saying I owe you $100, and I'm saying no, it's only 50. The Jewish court will administer to me a biblically prescribed oath. And therefore, we see in the Talmud, it would have been pretty common, especially if it's talking about $50. I'd say, no, you know something, I'll give you the $50. I don't want to take an oath. Because an oath was not only about what me committing the idea of taking an oath and in a court and using God's name, it was just considered so grave. Why would I put myself in that position? I'd rather pay the $50. And that's something that we find in Jewish law. It was I would say it was pretty common that would happen because people took taking an oath so seriously. Now, another part of this that's going to be relevant to here is that if I was a witness to one of you telling the other, I owe you $100. So I had an admission. I heard it. A witness has a responsibility to say what they know. And for me to say, I just don't want to be involved. You're both my friends. I'm not coming. That's considered a problem. I really, if you're asking me to come and say what I know, it's a biblical problem for me to say no. Now, in Torah law, if I'm the only witness, you need two witnesses to actually compel someone to do something. But with one witness, like I said before, we could compel an oath, and that also might be decisive in this. The main thing is if there are two people, they have a quandary, and they're turning to me for me to say what I know. And here it's words also, but it's testimony. I really can't duck it. I don't have to volunteer it if they don't know I heard it. Although maybe it would be a nice thing for me to do. But the main thing is if I'm asked, I can't say no. Okay, so having said that, let's get into this a little bit more. Chapter 5. In the following 4 cases, a person must bring, instead of the ordinary sin offering, a sin offering in accordance with his or her means. So Moses says to the Jewish people here, okay, you Jews have seen, and will see further, that you must recognize and respect the power of speech, particularly with regard to the consequences of oaths, vows, pledges, dedications, and the like. There are 2 types of oaths that, if violated, require you to bring the variable sin offering about to be described. That if you violated an oath, then you have to bring this variable sin offering. First oath regards giving testimony. In general, you should not refrain from testifying in a court case if you have any testimony to offer. Okay. If there's a court case and you were there, and you saw, if that's the case, then you should be going, because you know it. And why would you? What would you want from someone else? As a matter of fact, just for those who know, they can recognize the Hebrew. On the second line of the Hebrew, the first word is O, and the fourth word it says im lo. Lo there means not. If you will not tell, if you will not say his testimony, but it's misspelled, except that the Torah uses that spelling. The way that it's written is there's supposed to be 2 letters in it, the Lamed and the Aleph. If it was the lamed and the vav, which is the middle letter there, it would mean something else, which would mean to him. So rabbis tell us that not a person saying that they don't want to tell testimony. They should think about how it would feel to him if the other guy had testimony to say to his benefit, and he said no. But really, this is the guiding principle in Torah of interpersonal relationships. What we don't like done to us, don't do to someone else. Therefore, here the idea is that because you should not refrain from testifying. Of course, if you have any testimony to offer. In fact, if a litigant asks you to testify on his behalf and you deny having any testimony to offer, the litigant is allowed to make you swear to that effect. The litigant can compel an oath. And again, even though we're so reluctant with oaths, if he says, "I know you were there," and you say, "I have nothing to say," so well, then swear to the court that you have nothing to say. And swear to the court you didn't hear anything, you didn't see anything. And so this is a case of a court case, and this is primarily about financial things. If a person sins by having heard a litigant summon him to testify on his behalf by administering to him an oath containing an explicit or implicit curse, the oath, one of the things that in the oath in a court system was that we'd use God's name and would say that if I'm lying, we don't say, God strike me dead or whatever the people expressions use. They say that I understand that there will be repercussions because it's God's world, and I'm using God's name to say a lie. So that's what we say. There's this curse, and the person is indeed a witness to the incident in question by virtue of having seen it or otherwise having known what happened. So this is a case where someone was called to court. Two people have this dispute. They say, let's call Jimmy to court because he was there. Or one of them says, Jimmy was there. Jimmy says, I don't know what you're talking about. I was there. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I was looking at my phone. So I don't believe you. Come to a bed din. We're assuming these are believing people. Come to a bed din. And the court is going to administer an oath to you. You're going to have to swear that you don't know anything about this. And the oath, well, you will be uttering repercussions. If you're lying using God's name, where there are going to be repercussions. Which I say that was very, very serious in Torah thinking. If he denies under oath having witnessed the incident and therefore does not testify, he will bear the punitive consequences of his transgression until he expiates it by offering up this sacrifice. It does not matter in this case whether the person swears intentionally or unintentionally. What his intention was. The fact is that he's done something, and he's made an oath, and it was not true. Second type of oath whose violation requires you to bring a variable sin offering will be discussed presently. And here he says, or a different case, not this testimony one. It will be explained later that animal carcasses, other than carcasses of permanent animals that were properly ritually slaughtered. So there are kosher animals, there are non-kosher animals. So let's say a cow and a leopard. So an animal carcass of a leopard. We've studied a little bit. We'll be studying more about these idea of things that are destabilizing spiritually. Not that there's anything evil about it. We don't know. It's not something we see. But this is what the Torah tells us. Not that a Kohen, someone who needed to be in a totally ritually pure place for sacred matters, was not allowed to touch any carcass. There was something specific about the carcass of a non-kosher animal. Or if it was a carcass of a kosher animal that wasn't properly slaughtered. So in other words, it's treif, it can't be eaten. In part, ritual defilement. Thus, if a person touches the carcass of any spiritually defiled animal, whether it be the carcass of a spiritually defiled wild animal, the carcass of a spiritually defiled domestic animal, or the carcass of a spiritually defiled crawling animal, but he forgot that he'd become ritually defiled in this way, And during the period in which he did not know that he was ritually defiled, he ate consecrated food or entered the precincts of the tabernacle, which is punishable by excision or if done intentionally. And he later realized that he was defiled when he did so. He thereby incurs guilt. So this is not so much an oath, but the idea is that it was the oath is what or the pledge is what created sacred food, saying this is for the temple, this is for an offering, whatever it may be, and now it's being defiled by this person. So let's just look at a closer look. 1. It says an oath containing an explicit or implicit curse. If a potential witness refuses a litigant's request to testify on his behalf, the litigant is allowed to administer an oath to the recalcitrant witness, saying, I hereby make you, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, swear in the name of God that you do not have any testimony to offer in my case. This is what we spoke out before. And you are hereby cursed if you do have testimony to offer, you do not present it. The words in parentheses being applied, even if they are not explicitly said. Okay. And then we said about a spiritually defiled animal. A carcass of a permitted animal that died other than by a proper ritual slaughter also imparts ritual defilement. Someone who touches it and then intentionally enters the tabernacle precincts is liable to exclusion, just as in the case of the types of defilement mentioned explicitly in this verse. Okay. And as I say, the reason they're related is because it's through our words that we are able to sanctify food stuff or an area, and that's being violated. Or in number 3, it will be explained later that a person contracts ritual defilement through touching a corpse. And all of these are things that a Kohen has to be careful for, because a Kohen always wanted to be in proper. Well, this is something for us to mention now. Kohen was always very conscious of not getting into a place of what we're going to call spiritual imbalance, or what they're calling ritual defilement, because then they wouldn't be able to do their work in the temple. Now, it doesn't mean that was something wrong. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was something that brought this idea of this ritual imbalance. One of the things would be touching a corpse. There's nothing wrong with touching a corpse. As a matter of fact, often it's a mitzvah to touch a corpse. If no one's taking care of it, it's a big mitzvah to take care of a corpse that needs attending. But what it would impart this ritual impurity. So a Kohen generally would stay away from that, and someone else would do it. A Kohen could only be even at the funeral of immediate family members, and a Kohen would not go to a cemetery, which I go to all the time, and it's a good thing. So, just for the understanding of it, one of the things that a Kohen would do was not only when it came to spiritual, to things in the temple, would they make sure to be in a spiritually balanced place, but they would lead their lives that way. So they were always trying to maintain this level of spiritual balance. And if something happened, and there was a way, they'd go to the mikveh, they would have to wait 7 days sometimes, or whatever the prescription was. And we're going to get into some of that. But that also became a very common thing for non-Kohens. So, for example, the reason we wash our hands before we eat bread in a ritual way, wash our hands for hygiene. We do that because we want to be clean. We wash our hands for hygiene 2 or 3 times on the right. We do 3 times on the right. Some people do two, and then on the left, 2 or 3 times. That's a Talmudic idea, and it's the language of the Talmud is that we're purifying our hands to be able to eat food in purity. Now, we're not a Kohen, But the thing is that the common folk, the non-Kohens, would also try to maintain that type of purity, even though they weren't working in the temple, and especially when it came to dealing with their food, to do that in a way of purity. So that's how the washing on bread became a Jewish practice, first for purity, and then also to keep on doing it, even though now we're all none of us are pure in the way of the temple, but we still do that. One of the reasons we did that by the Seder, if you remember, we took a spring vegetable, either leek or parsnip or onion, whatever people use for karpas, and you dip it in salt water. But before you do that, you wash your hands without a blessing, but you wash your hands. Same way you do for bread. That's because in Torah law, as we're going to study in the stuff coming in the future Torah portions in this book, vegetables too, especially if they're wet, when they're wet, they can also contract impurity, and therefore, before eating a wet vegetable, they would wash their hands. And actually, does say that it suggests that in Jewish law, most people don't do it anymore, but not only to wash our hands, not only for bread, but before a wet vegetable. So that was worked into the Seder, because even though it's not done much anymore, but it was to pique the curiosity of the kids. Okay, so let's see if we can get a little bit done here. It says, we explain later that a person contracts ritual defilement through touching a corpse, through touching a person who had a seminal or uterine discharge, through touching a menstruant, through touching a woman after childbirth, because there's blood, or through eating carrion of a permitted fowl that was not slaughtered properly, even without otherwise touching it. Thus, if someone either A, touches a corpse directly or indirectly means by touching someone who themselves has touched a corpse and has not yet been purified of this defilement, this being the basic form of ritual defilement imparted by a human, or B, contract some other form of ritual defilement by touching someone who had a seminal or uterine discharge, a menstruate, or a woman after childbirth, or even C, touches a man who was defiled on account of having conducted marital relations with a menstruant, who has not yet been purified of this defilement, never defiles him, or D, eats carrion of a fowl that would have been permitted for consumption had it been properly slaughtered. And in any way of these cases, he was originally aware that it had become ritually defiled in this way, but at some later point forgot about it, and during the period in which he did not know he was ritually defiled, he ate consecrated food, and consecrated means that someone has said something and consecrated it, or entered the tabernacle precincts and he later realizes that he was defiled. When he did so, he is thereby incurred guilt. So here, the cases of eating consecrated food or entering the tabernacle precincts while in a state of ritual defilement are just specific instances of the type of transgression that normally obligates a person to bring a regular sin over, namely inadvertently transgressing a passive commandment punishable by excision if performed intentionally. The difference is that the individual is obligated to bring a variable sin offering only if he knew originally it had become defiled, forgot about it, and committed the sin before he remembered. Means of atonement for committing the sin under other circumstances will be discussed later. So this, let's finish it here. We're going to get a bit more into the details of this next week. Actually a little bit next week. But the idea is that there is a sliding scale, I guess we can call, of offerings, specifically when it comes to these problems of violating something that we've uttered with our mouths, whether it's an oath or consecration, or there'll be some other possibilities coming up in page 25. Pesach doesn't end until this coming Saturday night. So I wish you all a happy and meaningful Passover, a meaningful Pesach. If you have any questions.
I just wanted to mention one point, if that's okay.
Sure.
And then maybe you could tell me if I'm on the right track. I feel like each Torah class is meant for each one of us specifically for maybe that day, just to even take out a point or something that could make the day better or the week or whatever. And one point that really touched me today, and I just wanted to, go over this with you. And it's a difficult concept, not, especially when you're in the moment. You were talking about each challenge is kind of orchestrated for each of us by God and to grow and become closer. And it's not a punishment or haphazard, and I guess in terms of response to that, we all have the power to overcome this challenge with that trust, which isn't always easy at the moment, despite how difficult the situation is. And just to grow, we can always overcome that challenge, I guess is what I'm getting at. If you totally trust, despite how difficult it is.
Lori, I totally believe what you just said. I'm careful. I don't want.
Right, it's very difficult because
Yes,
it could be a crazy
absolutely.
challenge where you just don't understand.
And I those are the words you said are the words I try to live by every day. At the same time, if someone walks into my office today and says they have a challenge, I gotta make. I probably not going to tell them, this focus and you can overcome the challenge. I believe that we can all overcome challenges, but it's not for every ear. Not every ear can easily hear that all the time. But I totally buy into exactly what you just said. I'm living in God's world, and God's sending me messages, and I've got to accept that and deal with it.
I just wanted to thank you because today I just needed to hear that. I've got a whirlwind of things going on, so that really hit me. And thank you every day for all this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you for saying it.
I want to thank Lori for saying that, because hopefully that will, I'll have enough trust to get me through.
Well,
So,
God willing.
My question is, I understand that it's to make you grow, but sometimes the challenges get too hard. And you know yourself that not all people can deal with the challenges.
Yes, well, that's kind of where I was going. I get it, and sometimes we have to be very gentle in trying to guide, someone to a place where they feel that they can do it. But I do believe, and I know this isn't easy sometimes to hear and for people, and that's why I'm very careful about saying it. But I do believe God is holding our hand and sending us messages.
Well, I need two hands.
Holding our hands. There, you got it.
Thank you, Mendy. Have a
Okay. Okay. Be well. Enjoy your Pesach.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
sent you.
Thank you.
I sent you a text.
Okay.
Mendy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye. Thank you.